just going to wait about a minute or so before we get started here.
Hey, Gus, and everybody, that Microsoft Teams chat, I can hear the beeps coming from your computer, I think, on those alerts.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Eastville 2040 Clear Vision Speaker Series. Tonight's guest speaker is Joe Minicozy, and he will be talking about economic development and the dollars and cents of community building. There we go. All right, just a quick overview of tonight's program. We'll do some brief introductions and then get into the Eastville 2040 plan. Just a brief overview of what that is, and then talk a little bit about next steps. And then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Joe, who will be talking about the dollars and cents of community building. Once Joe is done with his presentation, we will open it up for questions and discussion. And at that point, you could provide a question or a comment in the Q&A session box. And we will go ahead and read it out aloud, and or you can also raise your hand, and in the raise hand feature, use the raise hand feature, and we will go ahead and allow you to speak and ask your question or provide your comment. So on the city staff, we have Gina Gibson-Williams, who is our Community Development Director. She is available for questions as well, and also will be here to chime in as necessary. And then myself, Gustavo Gonzalez, I'm the planning manager here for the city of Eastville, and I've been in my role for about 4 months, but I am an Eastville native. I actually grew up in Eastville, and so I couldn't be happier to be in this position, to be able to see oversee a project that's going to see the growth of the city over the next 20 years. So as a planner, it just doesn't get better than being a planner in a city in your hometown and going through an effort like this. On the project consultant side, we have Mark Teague, who is our project lead with PlaceWorks, and he actually was involved in the first general plan for the city. And then we have Bob Starks, who's with Michael Baker International, who will be leading up our environmental review efforts and putting the environmental impact report together for us. And then finally, we have Susan Harden, who is leading up our outreach efforts, and she's helped us put these speaker series vision together for us. So the Eastville 2040 plan. So just before we get into a brief overview of that, I just wanted to kind of chime in on what our core values are for the Eastville 2040 plan. These are the values that we develop, and these are the values that we hope the community holds us accountable to as we go through the process. And so I'll just go ahead and read them out. This is to discover Eastville's potential, to capture Eastville's imagination, represent your community, and shape Eastville's expectations. So as we go through the general plan update, we want to ensure that the end result and the end product really embodies these values. So what is a general plan? So if you don't know what a general plan is, no problems. We'll give you a quick crash course here on what a general plan is all about. So essentially, it's often described as the constitution for a city's development. It is a foundation upon which all development decisions are based. It brings the community together to develop a shared vision for the next 25 to 35 years. It guides future actions by establishing priorities, goals, and policies in the general plan, and it sets the tone for the development of land and protection of people and resources. It's something that we have to be in compliance with state law, so we have to develop a general plan and update it every 10 to 15 years. So as property develops in the city of Eastville, this is where we first start. This is where a developer comes to us and says, what do you want to see on this property? We look at the general plan, and there's a land use map that we look at, and that establishes, what should be developed on that property. And we follow the vision, and we follow the policies and goals, and we ensure that it's aligned with all of that. There are 8 required elements or chapters in the general plan. These include land use, circulation, housing, noise, conservation, safety, open space, and environmental justice. So we've done quite a bit of outreach already with the general plan update. Our portal for everything related to this project is the Engage Eastville website. You want to go on there to be able to provide comments, see what other folks are saying. It's where all our speaker series videos are housed, and anything related to this project, you'll be able to pull from that website. So all of the documents that come out of the environmental impact report, the final draft EIR, and the draft EIR that will be reviewed by the community is also going to be available on this website. We've gone out and done several community champion interviews. So this is a process that we got out and interviewed about 15 to, I want to say now about 18 folks who are community champions in the city of Eastville, and basically have asked them, where do you see Eastville now and where do you see it in the future? And their responses is something that's going to be folded into a report that really brings it together and tells us what the community wants to see in the next 15 to 20 years. And then finally, the Clear Vision speaker series, and is another outreach effort, and that's what we're doing now. And so we've done, this is our 5th one. We've done 4 previously. We kicked it off in November with Chris Stanley, who talked about mobility and health, and then moved on with Victor Dover to talk about community development or the urban design of developing a general plan. That was on December 2nd. And then Shanika Johnson gave a great presentation on diversity and inclusion back in January 14th. And then finally, the last one we did was with Dan Perolik, who talked about housing and the missing middle and the importance of having a diverse housing stock in your city. That was on January 28th. So just a word cloud here of some of the things that we're hearing in our outreach efforts. And I won't go through all of these, but in essence, what we're hearing is that folks really want a place to congregate. It's what Eastville's missing. We have everything other than a living room. We don't have our own living room, right? And so we're looking for these places where we have housing, a mixture of uses. We have a nightlife, a place to walk to. It's really a place to form memories as you to share with your family and to grow in this community. And so that's really what I think a lot of folks are telling us, that we're missing that. And so our general plan will help us establish that. In terms of schedule and process, we are right now in winter 2021, and we're basically cleaning up and finishing up the outreach effort. And then we'll go ahead and jump into drafting some of the general plan elements, which we already are doing. And we're in the process of also getting ready to kick off the environmental impact report process, which essentially will analyze all the environmental impacts of the project. And what that will do is will allow us to, any project that conforms to the general plan and comes under the general plan, as long as it conforms to it, it will have a much smoother process through the development process and get adopted and approved quicker than having to do its own environmental impact review. So again, I just want to quickly mention the Eastville, Engage Eastville website. This is, again, where you want to go for everything related to this project. And so you can go on there and also sign up to receive notifications from the staff and the city to keep informed on everything coming out for this project. So, and then finally, I just want to mention our next speaker is going to be John Arroyo, who is with the University of Oregon. He's a professor there who will be talking about creative placemaking and suburban development. And that will be on March 9th, 2021 from 6 p.m. to 7:30. And we hope that you can join us for that, the final session. So now I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Joe, and I just briefly introduce Joe. Joe is an urban planner imagining new ways to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. He founded Urban 3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax and land use policies, and works with communities across the country. So please help me welcome Joe Minicozy to the program. Go ahead and stop sharing, and you can share yours, Joe.
Thanks, Gustavo. And let's get this over to here. Okay, so I'm going to move fairly fast through through a lot of information, and basically what I want to try to do is provoke maybe ideas of how you think about cities and how you think about information in your city, as well as the economics. Back in the end of last year, somebody asked me this question of, will COVID-19 stop transit? So the first thing that my mind went to is like, well, what happened in the last pandemic? So I actually found this newspaper cartoon from the Indianapolis Star from 1918, where there's the pandemic riding the transit system with that cowboy there. But did we stop doing streetcars? In fact, we didn't stop doing streetcars. We didn't stop doing schools or churches or theaters or Halloween or funerals or even football games. Like all of these things got shut down the same way they got shut down in this past pandemic. And we came back. The urban environment comes back. In fact, we actually wore masks back then, even though they were worse masks than what we have now. They were gauze masks. We didn't spit on the bus, but we also enforced the mask wearing situation. So how was it that we had this collective amnesia and didn't just go back in time and just see, were we able to achieve this once before? What did we learn in this process? And how is it so difficult now to basically do the exact same thing, deal with the exact same issue, yet we're different people somehow? And what it comes down to is the way that we talk about things. We tend to have there's a certain amount of facts that are out there, and then there are folks that don't necessarily have facts, or they operate off their biases or their heuristics, what they think is going on, or their belief systems. And there's actually science behind this. Now we tend to focus on science and talk about like the systematic study of the natural or the built environment. So we'll talk about climate change. You know, we're all comfortable with that now, at least. But what we don't talk about is the study of science and how our brains operate, the structure of our behavior. And it is kind of comical in my practice that I'll be bringing information to people and they're behaving differently. And it's usually a shock to me and also other people. But there's science behind it. There's actually, I like to cite these two guys, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. These are two psychologists that actually won a Nobel Prize or Nobel Prizes in economics, because they figured out that we make irrational choices. We don't make qualitative or quantitative choices. There sometimes that are our own economic self-interest is put aside. And they saw our brains as operating two different ways. We actually have a slow brain, a reflexive brain, a brain that's our thinky brain. And then we have our fast brain. So to give you an idea of those two brains in action, imagine if I was driving with you down the street. You're making millions of decisions. That's your automatic brain going. You're like checking your speed, looking for stoplights, all that stuff. Now, if I were to ask you, hey, what's 275 divided by the square root of 47? Like you'd have to stop your car and take out a pencil and actually work that out. That's your reflexive brain in action. But most of our decisions are made with this reflexive brain, the Homer Simpson brain that I call it. And we like to rationalize all the ways that we're going to stand up for that bad decision that we make. So we'll go for the donut and totally ignore the New Year's resolution that we all agreed to at the beginning of the year. That's our brain in action. That's what happens when we talk about things, is that we can cut through a lot of things that we're supposed to be doing in slow mode, and we'll go straight to fast mode. And there's another economist. This is an economist that won an economics Nobel Prize, who actually worked with those two psychologists that developed a whole field called behavioral economics. And they figured out that we basically make bad choices. There's those two books that he wrote. I'd actually recommend Misbehaving over Nudge, but basically they go in through all of these. It's actually kind of painful to read because we're all guilty of this. And what they come to or deduce is that citizens have a psychological tendency to misevaluate their own economic self-interest. If asked for something, we will actually make the wrong choice. Or another way of putting it, people just don't do the math. So let me walk you through an example. This is one of my favorite stories. This is, if you look at the bottom down there, we see where I've highlighted it. In Indiana, the state, basically, we're going to charge everybody $40 to $50 a month to ride a bus. So if you put a kid on the bus, that's your choice because you chose to live where you live. And that kid's going to take a bus that's not part of schooling, that's extra. And this guy, Jeff Bennett, was upset about that, that he had to spend a half hour a day each way to take his kid to school, to drive his kid to school. And I'm like, all right, well, let's do some math. If he's spending a half hour each way, then that's like an hour a day that he's spending in his car. It's going to be about 20 hours a month that he's doing this. And let's just take the average income of the average Indiana residents, about $28 an hour. So that I can now put his time value of money here. How much is he spending in his time at that billable rate to drop his kid off? Well, that's about $560 a month. Or another way of putting it, Jeff spends $560 a month to save 40, or Jeff loses $520 a month. Does that make any, like, this is real simple math. Why wouldn't you run this formula in his head? Now you might say, well, Joe, maybe Jeff isn't the average, maybe Jeff's below average, he's at a poverty level. Well, he's got a car, but let's run the poverty number. That's $10 an hour. at the poverty level for Indiana, that's $200 a month. So even at a poverty level, he's losing $160 a month. How do we not see this? Even more so, going back to that story, the thing that's really painfully obvious to me in the story is this. His son can't walk to school because there's no sidewalks. Put in a sidewalk. It's not that hard. So you just see with this one example, this is what I see writ large over city economics. And we can't see staring at us in our face that there are all of these suburban biases that are baked into the system that actually work against us. And we're marketed a form of development patterns that we think is working for us, but it doesn't work out overall. And when I bring this information to folks, what I'm also often dealt with or deal with people is this kind of confirmation bias. Back to that Homer Simpson brain, we will shroud our bad decision with all sorts of biases to make sure that we feel like we've accomplished what our Homer Simpson brain wants. So we're going to defend that donut, whether we like it or not. We're not going to say like, I just wanted a donut. I know it's bad for me. We won't say that because we'll feel guilty. And we saw this with the origination of climate change or the discussions of it back in the early 2000s. And this guy, Jeff Powell, just made this pie chart. In red are all the scientific papers that rejected global warming. In black are all the peer-reviewed papers that said that it's happening. Yet people would still point at that little sliver and say, these prove that I'm right. This is what we see is that it just, we're going to do this. This is a human behavior. This is the way that we behave. And also back to our country, there's a great colonial barb that I like to use, which is don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fellow behind the tree. Like, we're a country that formed a tax revolt because we got our tea taxed. We're essentially a country of tax evaders. This is who we are. We're going to try to avoid paying taxes. Y'all see that with your Prop 13 and all the other measures that you do to try to not pay taxes. Well, guess what? You have to pay for a city. That's the reality of what you're dealing with. So this is an American phenomena of how we deal with our tax system. How I got into this, little backstory about Asheville. I'm actually in their office still. This real estate developer, their name is Public Interest Projects, started by Julian Price in the upper left. And basically Julian put $15 million into this business that's around me here to invest in buildings downtown, but also seed startups. So we'd start businesses like restaurants and nightclubs, make things happen in the ground floor because we have apartments above it. So we take these things like this. This is an old hotel. And we essentially stripped all the metal off and made housing units upstairs and a bookstore downstairs. As we were doing this, we're essentially building wealth for our community. So we'd constantly talk with our community to get them past their biases, because they would tell us that they're not urban, that we're rural mountain people. We're not city dwellers like Atlanta or Charlotte or something like that. So all these empty buildings that were sitting around downtown, this is the value of rehabbing them. So we didn't get a new building in downtown until 2008. So you see all those upper stories that get value added to them. We invested $15 million into about $100 million portfolio. And we weren't the only ones doing work in downtown, but you can see how that value grew. So our taxes went up with it, which is great. That's building wealth in our community. Now, to show you that it's not all love and roses in Asheville, this is one of my friends, Chris Peterson, and here he is complaining about that $26 million of investment in downtown Asheville. $26 million is a lot of money, and he doesn't want that. He thinks that's a waste of spending downtown, just throwing our money away. I like this downtown development for bureaucrats instead of water, sewer, streets for our citizens. He's got a bias in the way that he looks at the city. He doesn't think that we need to have a downtown. So let's do some math here. If you invest $26 million on a $100 million asset, it grows to $500 million. Is investing 26 in yielding $430 million. Is that a good return on investment? Of course. So why do we listen to Chris? In the public realm just becomes littered with commentary or opinions without any substantive fact behind it. And so if we just leave Chris to his own devices or his Homer Simpson brain, he's going to keep going. He's got a website now with fire and brimstone. I like the lightning bolts hitting the mayor in the head. That's pretty cool. He's got an opinion about the way that government shouldn't exist or something. And what it is it gets down to civics, of how we understand what our community is. This is a kid's book that I found in a garage sale. And here it is, The Teacher's Guide, The City, the Town, and the Country. The City, Town, and Country. That's the title. It's a grade school book. It's a third grade textbook from 1959. Down here, you can see that. So in kindergarten, you learn about your house. First grade, the school. Second grade, the neighborhood. Third grade, you learn about regional planning. Did y'all do that? Do your third graders today learn about regional planning in Southern California? In the book for a teacher, it tells you this about dealing with your kids. You have to understand government. So while patterns vary from state to state, counties are responsible for education, library, health, welfare, etc. In studying the functions performed by your county, you will no doubt find there's a duplication of services and overlapping of jurisdictions and a lack of coordination between the county and the communities within it. So have you all, anybody on this webinar, have you gone down to a Los Angeles County Commission meeting lately? You know, it's just, how is this disconnect happening? And this is common in every government. It's just we tend to deal with whatever's closest to us and not understand that we're still county taxpayers. And also the county needs to collaborate with the communities. But here's one of the lesson plans. You can see what's happening. There's some overcrowding because a factory gets built and there's even more kids that go to school. So in blue right here, now it's painfully white. It's also misogynistic. The girls are shoved out in the hallway because it's the 50s apparently. But you read in blue right here, give 4 good reasons for building a new school. And your third graders talk about what? Equity, everybody should have a desk, maybe get another teacher, you know, that's balancing it out. But on the right, you hear about Mr. Canfield who didn't want to build a new school. He says our taxes are too high now. If we build a new school, we'll need more teachers and we'll have to pay higher taxes. That is indeed true. Stuff costs money. You build a greenway, it's going to cost money. And then in blue, you ask the third graders, why would some people be against paying higher taxes? Why would some people have to pay higher taxes? I mean, this is third graders having a civic conversation. And what I find with a lot of conversations is that we're really comfortable on one side or the other of this ledger, but not talking about how it's all got to balance out. And that's the community need. And really the point that drives it home in the whole book is this one paragraph here that remember many children, whether urban or rural, and regardless of region, are tragically limited in their knowledge of their world, and their world's largely the space in which they live and operate. Citizens understand today where they drop off their kids to school, where they go to work, where they pick their kids up. And if there's ever a disturbance in that, all of a sudden it's the city manager's fault or the mayor's fault. We don't understand the complexity of what cities are and how they have to operate, also the cash flow. But really what I would argue is that we don't understand our own responsibilities within that. So if you look at the Oxford Dictionary incorporate, it says to constitute a company, a city, or other organization is a legal corporation. So technically by law, my city is just a really big real estate development project. My county is an even bigger one beyond that. And if so is my state, but also so is our country. So is so is California. If you look up Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert show in 2016, the United States is the largest corporation in the world. And I'm such a nerd, I looked it up. And if anybody wants to look it up at home, here it is. Here, on the bottom of the slide is the US code that lists this as a federal corporation. That doesn't say we're a capitalist corporation. We're essentially a social corporation. We're all in it together. And it's got to work its way out. A road costs money. A pipe costs money. So in my case, my city of Asheville, North Carolina is $14 billion of taxable value, which is 6 times the value of Ted Turner. So does Ted Turner just like look at Facebook every day and that's how he makes his decisions? Does Ted Turner just wake up one day and go, I want a dog park? I mean, he can afford it, but how do we do that with our city? So my city needs to balance the books and realize that we are essentially a finite boundary of land that has to be managed. And if you think about it, that those acres are all that we have. And for you all, more so because you're hemmed in by all of these other cities around it. So those acres are critically important. And what I like to say is that we can have plenty of discussions about what we think is going on, but we have to bring data to the conversation to understand what's happening. So let me talk about the data for a second. I tend to look at the land of a city the way that a farmer looks at their land. So when you talk to a farmer, they're going to talk about the crop yield per acre, the water per acre, the labor per acre, and then how it cash flows. Well, the same is true with cities. So this is one of the buildings that we rehabbed, ground story retail, second floor office, and the upper stories is all residential. The city did the streetscape project. So this is what Chris got upset about. And he said that we were subsidized. So thank you, city, for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches and a street tree. That's awesome. We took this building's taxable value and increased it by 3,500%. So the way that I see it as an asset in our community's portfolio grew by 3,500%. Do y'all have a 401k plan that grows by that, or an investment account or a CD? No. So this is building our community wealth. Go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans. I don't care. This is how you increase potency in the community. And the immediate bias back was, well, Joe, that's fine. That's $11 million. This Walmart's 20 million. Fair enough. If you just look at that number, that's double the value. But it took 34 acres of my corporation or my farm to make that happen. We're on 0.2 acres. So per acre, apples to apples, we're producing 100 times more property taxes. We're producing double the retail taxes. Who would have thought that a beauty salon, a barber shop, and a furniture store would be more productive than a Walmart? But it is. That's the facts. We've got more residents than they do, and we also have more jobs. So this is how you look at the data and let the data drive your argument or discussion, or at least inform the conversation to understand what's better for you. And I just want you to realize this isn't complex math that I'm doing here. This is really simple land use economics or efficiency, if you think about it. And let's flip to a different object. If we were to talk about cars, could you imagine if I were to say my truck gets 650 miles per tank? It's got the most tank miles you can get on all these vehicles. You'd immediately laugh at me and say, Joe, that's stupid. All tanks are different sizes. We say miles per gallon. It's the unit of increment that drives the car, and that's how we can measure it. So when we say miles per gallon, the numbers change, and we should all be driving BMW Isettas. 1955 technology is actually more efficient than a Prius. Sorry to your Prius owners, but I'm making a joke out of this. But I'm showing you that we already this is a common conversation, a way that we talk about efficiency. Just bring it to the land the same way. So we've done this all across the country, 35 different states, a bunch of Canada, New Zealand. It's real simple. For every dollar of county taxes somebody out in the county is paying to the county per acre, in the unincorporated county, let's say, their brother and sister in the city is paying about 5 times that. Here's the Walmart, there's the mall. This is a 2-story building. As soon as you start stacking stories, that's a 3-story building, and this is a 6-story building. So we're not talking about massive buildings, but when you stack those stories, look at the exponential jump that you get out of it. This is the reality of how tax systems work. Conversely, when you just do 1-story boxes in a big sea of parking, you really don't get a whole lot of value out of it. That's the truth in the data. And some people would say to me like, hey, Joe, you just hate Walmart. If that's what you're thinking, you're totally missing the point. I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers, bunch of assessors. This makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man. It's like the squarest conference ever. They're really cool people. But this guy got up and presented a keynote address on how cheap Walmarts are. He did spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet on how cheap Walmarts are. I was blown away. He's getting all of his property tax bills lowered in one meeting because all the assessors are there. Now the assessors are agnostic. If it's a cheap building, it's a cheap building. They can't make value. So I went up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, hey, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he honestly shot back 15, 20 years. We're designing the building to depreciate it as fast as possible. We'll build another one. We'll walk away from the first one. We don't care about the buildings. They're throwaway. So that's it from the mouth of babes. If you build in that style, you're essentially building for a very short term. If you're okay with that as a community, go for it. That's about the life cycle investment of a cat. We at least mourn the passing of a cat, but that's all you're going to get out of it. I'm a dog person. Sorry for the cat people. I'm just making a joke, but this is about understanding the life cycle of the investment in your community, your portfolio. What kind of benefit is that for you? How is that going to work out long term? And when I started doing this stuff, I really started figuring out like we're basically functionally illiterate in the tax system. I presented at the Smart Growth Conference in 2009. I actually started with this slide, and I stood before my peers. I'm trained as a urban designer. And I'm in front of planners and urban designers, landscape architects, city officials, all this. And I had my hand in the air and I said, who in this room fully understands and comprehends how your local tax assessment system works in your community? Not a single person put their hand in the air. And it just made me realize that we're just basically not trained to do with this stuff, even though this is the cash flow that runs our communities. And you may say, well, why is it people don't understand it or don't see it? And I think a lot of it is because we just don't communicate it well. It's jargon, it's policies that are buried in other things. It's just silos of different government systems that don't talk to each other. So what we try to do is focus on, if I can visualize that, let's say the information of your brain, I can show you your creative thought process in green versus your brainstem activity in blue. Could I do an economic MRI of your place? Can I show you your economics is an image? So this is the way that we kind of think about it. This is my county. Gray is non-taxable. So this is a big federal park right here, Mount Mitchell. Down here, this is a big federal park, Mount Pisgah. So it's non-taxable. I don't care about it. It doesn't give me taxes. Let's just be rude about that. So in green is low value. So you see the low value up here. Purple is high value. See this big purple splotch. That's the Biltmore estate. That's America's largest house. It's worth $100 million for a house, which is awesome. But it's really not a fair way of looking at it because it's a 180,000 square foot house. Anybody have a 180,000 square foot house? No. Well, one person does. And it's on 8,000 acres of land. So it's like having the biggest gas tank. So rather than total value, let's do value per acre. The map changed. I'll just show it to you in 3D. So you can see where downtown is popping off the map. I don't even have to label it. You can also see the village of Black Mountain 9 miles away, and you can see its little downtown, like a little baby version of the big downtown. Now, for my friends out in Fairview, in between Black Mountain downtown, and think they pay a lot of taxes, their only relative frame of reference might be a cousin that lives out in Hickory Nut Gap or something like that. They have no idea what people are paying in downtown. So show it to them. And rather than hate on us, have them send us a thank you card for all the money that we're sending out to the county because we're the producers. So I would argue that we have to show folks this stuff and not just talk about it without an image or some kind of graphic way to represent it. And you might be thinking, well, Joe, this is California, we're different. No, you're not. You may have different policies, but it yields the same result. This is Sonoma County. You can see all the downtowns. You can also see Roanoke Park that never really built up a downtown. It's clear as day in the model. And Santa Rosa is the prime. And you can see Santa Rosa's downtown. You can go to New Hampshire and see the same type of modeling. Can you guess where downtown is? Or Bozeman, Montana. So these are patterns that we see time and time again. You need to have that potency to balance out the relatively low return of the suburban single family environment. We just don't tax ourselves that much in our houses. So what about you? There's a much larger presentation. I'm just going to fly through some quick parts of it. You live in a really big county, by the way, Riverside County. We had to cut a piece of it out. We call it the chicken leg of this little area to just geoprocess that because most of your county is non-taxable anyway. But within the chicken leg area, which is from East Val down to Temecula, basically running down the 15 spine and grabbing Riverside, it's a pretty big area. It's almost the size of Rhode Island, which is kind of stunning how much area you have. And think about how many hundreds of cities are in just little Rhode Island. And so where are they within you? We can also see that you really don't have anything that pops up. A Riverside sort of does. But given the amount of population that you have, we were expecting something bigger. And for Eastvale, I'll be honest, you're pretty flat because you're pretty much a monolithic form of development. And this isn't your fault. This is just the pattern of what you are. So to give you some examples, the Walmart's about 1.4 million an acre. Your Target is a little bit more than that at 1.8 million. And on the bottom of the slide, you'll see I'll keep the Walmart on there. But single family is about 2.8 million. When you get into your multifamily, it bumps up to about 5.2, 5.4. And this is your big breadwinner at 8 million an acre. That's the top of your model. But this is the truth of the data is that your multifamily is more potent than your single family. And as Dan Paralek from Opticos talked about, there's the missing middle. You don't have a whole lot of it in your community, but you do have a lot of it over in Riverside. So these buildings, which are right now pretty derelict from a rehab standpoint, you can see the one on the right is pulling $2.6 million an acre, and it's been doing that for over 100 years. This is potent stuff. So you have to find ways to have this stuff grow in your community as well and evolve your community to grow your wealth as well. And then there were some other things that were kind of stunning. This is where the movie theater is. This is about 3.4 million an acre. That's actually less valuable than the strip along Magnolia Ave in Riverside. And so these are the numbers. So that density of building, even though they're little 1- and 2-story buildings, are more productive than your movie theater strip, which is pretty mind-blowing. And also Riverside is doing some interesting stuff with infill and pulling pretty good value at $5 million and $9 million of value per acre out of that, or about double what your average multifamily is. There's a lot of lessons you can learn from other places in older urbanism. And again, you've got a good cousin right down the road over there in Riverside. You can see these buildings on the right are pulling $8 million an acre. These buildings here, the one on the right is pulling $3.6 million an acre. And there it is in the 1930s or 1940s postcard on the left, or even the 1920s. There's a little building down there that's 17 million an acre. from 100 years ago, which is pretty amazing. So use these examples. And again, another cousin, Temecula, is already doing this kind of stuff. So they've started building a downtown by basically swapping, I guess, collaborating with public parking as a structure to get more density around it. And so these buildings are pulling 18, 19 million an acre, $28 million an acre, which is really stunning. And this is an effective strategy of growing up a downtown. So to put that in perspective, less than an acre of the building on the left would equal the 10-acre target in your community. So this is a way of thinking about what's the next iteration of how do you grow up. As you think through in your future, what are your models that you want to use? And for retail, we did model your retail. You're getting it all out of one place. But when you stack your retail on your property taxes, this really isn't, it's hard to explain that this isn't that great. So let me just show you an example. Durango, Colorado runs very similar to the way that California runs. This is their property tax model. And the South Durango is where all the retail is, the mall, the Home Depot, the Walmart, all that's on South Durango. So this is the property tax model. Here's the retail tax model. So even though all of the South Durango is monolithically retail, it's still being beat up by downtown. That's your conventional, traditional downtown. So when you stack the two of them together, this is the opportunity that you could have in your future. Keep your single family suburban areas, but find an area to grow it up, to garner your wealth in your community. And also that's the place where your jobs are. Now, to show you not all retail is the same, the reason why downtown's winning is just on the diversity of the retail that it has. So we had a couple of business owners that wanted an apples to apples study of the downtown. So these two guys, they're really funny guys. Peter and Tim has a coffee shop and a bookstore. So they gave us their books and they wanted another study the way that we did the Asheville one. So we gave them their bar chart. So here are their two businesses stacked up against Walmart. Here's the property taxes. So who'd have thought that those two little books, that bookstore and a coffee shop, are 15 times the productivity in property taxes versus the Walmart, and 7 times the retail sales. And then also a lot more jobs. Small independent businesses are incredibly productive. Think past the chain store for a second. Think through the retail environment of these small entrepreneurs that are taking risks, bringing cool stuff, but they're also employing a lot of people. Now, let me ask you a question. Who's hiring or who's paying more per hour on the blue side or the gray side? Probably the blue side. It's going to be a nickel more, but those small businesses will do that. Now, who's hiring the local website designer, the local attorney, the local accountant? Is it the blue side or the gray side? It's going to be the blue side. So when you think through, the typology of retail is significant from an economic standpoint, but also from a socioeconomic standpoint of how it produces in your community. Just be aware of that. And listen to the entrepreneurs in your community and find out where their stress points are. So one of the roles that the studies that we did for you all was to think of, how do you fit in your context? What are you missing from a downtown standpoint? So these are just cutting out the different communities in Riverside and putting you all side by side, so that you can see the top value per acre. That's the bottom line of this chart. You all are low, and you have that's an opportunity to grow it up, and it's just changing your building type. And this is something that we did just put you side by side with. We were doing some places in Minnesota at the same time. And this is Rice County, Minnesota, which is home to Northfield, Minnesota. This is Riverside County, and then this is Hennepin County. Notice the population difference there. Riverside County is 2 million people. It's actually more population than Hennepin County, Minnesota. And so you can see how this pulses out like an economic heart monitor. And that's home to Minneapolis. Why didn't you make a Minneapolis by now? And this is the thing that's an opportunity in all of the all of the Inland Empire that could happen. It could have happened anywhere in this model. It's mind-blowing to us coming from the East Coast and being somewhat ignorant about Southern California, and learning about what you are and just seeing the scale of this. So you're 4.6 million people, 27,000 square miles. Do y'all realize you're the same area and population as South Carolina? So this is not doing this to shame you. It's just be aware of the opportunity there. Somewhere in the Inland Empire, you could have a Charleston or Greenville or Columbia. You could have a very potent place. And that's just something that just no one really asked the right question about that. So you're looking at the Leal site as an opportunity. And we just, again, you'll have all of this stuff in your community, but here's if you just add a downtown. We just carved in Temecula and dropped it in there, and you can see it jump up as an opportunity in the, and here's if you just did some Riverside in there. So you have these models, and you can see how the little purple mountain pops up as you add different typologies. These are all things that you can do by design. These are all things that you can do by working with the property owner. And a lot of pushback that I get from people is just like, all right, Joe, you just want big buildings everywhere. No, I want you to think through the numbers and understand that even small buildings can make a difference. This is a 6 foot wide building in Boston called the Skinny House, and it's pulling 62 million an acre. And it's not just Boston. This is like Washington, DC, these buildings. I like that the, one of them is skinnier than a mini. On the right is 67 million an acre. Or this is an interesting story. You don't have to be in a big city. This is Alexandria, Virginia. This is a house that was built as a dollhouse for the house to the right of it. And then when the daughters grew up, one of them actually moved next door and moved into the house, and they never tore it down. And somebody actually lives in a house that's on a land lot that's only 356 square feet. Like, there's places for everybody if you allow it to happen. So allow for the diversity. Don't be so fussy about it. But this thing's pulling 65 million an acre or 64 million an acre. So this is, look at cities and understand what's going on, and ask yourself different questions. Get yourself past your biases. And one of the biases I hear from people all the time is, well, we don't want density. Okay, well, if you say no to something, you're going to get something else. One of my favorite communities that asked me this was Gwinnett County, Georgia. They told me they didn't want density. And in fact, they went further. Southern places are hilarious. They actually told me, and I don't know if y'all know Gwinnett County, Lawrenceville is the home county seat. But they told me I wasn't allowed to say 4 words in my presentation. I couldn't say the word urban, city, town, or municipal in my presentation. They said, these are ugly words down here. We're rural people. I was like, all right, so I don't know what I'm going to say about my company. I guess we're just 3. But as we started doing the analysis, they're northeast of Atlanta. I called my client. I was like, Kelly, y'all are 812,000 people. She goes, yeah, but sugar, look, we're 460 square miles. We're huge. I was like, all right, well, I can do some math. 460 square miles divided into 812,000 people is about 1,900 people square miles, which is per square mile, which is less dense than DeKalb that has Decatur and a piece of Atlanta in it. But we had all of this other data, so I presented it to them. I said, so y'all are denser than Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. You're actually 200 people per square mile denser than Mecklenburg. What's in Mecklenburg? And they were shocked. And somebody goes, Charlotte? I was like, yeah, I've heard of Charlotte. I've never heard of Lawrenceville. Davidson County, you're 600 people denser than them. That's home to Nashville. So the 2 places that are less dense than you have a professional football team. There's no such thing as the Gwinnett County Cowboys, is there? This is Austin, Texas. You're double their density. This is Raleigh. This is Asheville. That's Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This is what rural looks like. I don't know what y'all did here. So we did their model and showed it to them. And it's just like a yellow ooze across the whole thing. And when you lay it on its side, it looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's just flat across the whole thing. This is not good. And they've told themselves, they've had this bias that we're rural. And I'm like, no, you've got some density here. This is what we typically see. This is a rural environment of Orange County that has Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Hillsborough. And I could see the downtowns of each of those places in the model. This is some new urbanism over here. I can see in the economics, I can understand what's going on at an urban design level. I don't know what I could say about this. So the most potent building in their entire community is this building here that's 4 stories tall that was left by their great grandparents. That's it. That's the best thing they've got. And so all these places are less dense. Asheville, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, we're all less dense, including Austin. And we have so much more wealth. So back to the heart monitor, we put the 3 counties at the same scale, side by side by side, and we pulse them out. And we just showed them, like, you're not really getting a heartbeat over in Gwinnett County. So we've got a peak value of 192 million in Nashville, 476 in Austin, and you're flatlining in Lawrenceville. That's what you got. So you have all the horizontal infrastructure, none of the vertical stuff to pay for it. And I asked them, I said, are you going broke? And one of the commissioners goes, yeah, we're going broke. How'd that happen? And some people are just foolish enough to think, well, we've got plenty of money. We're just going to keep growing. No, you're a corporation. You need to balance it out. So in Eugene, Oregon, we took the city and did, this is a city floating in a lake. And you could see the side view of it with the money coming out of the ground. And then we sent them a bill for all of their infrastructure at every parcel. And you could see that sunk into the ground. Incidentally, have y'all ever heard of Gatsby? Gatsby is the Government Accounting Standards Board. They create this weird standard that every community follows, including your state and our federal government, that lists roads and pipes as assets. Can you sell your roads to Riverside? No. You know, it's like they're a liability for you. So when you just by how you change the accounting, you can see how much you're in the ground. And that's all we're doing here. That's magic. We're just not following the standard because it's foolish. It's just a fluke. Actually, what it's done is the board of directors for the Gatsby are all bond raters. So these are all bond people. For them, that's an asset because they're going to sell you money to buy for that road. That's the flaw in the system. So when you net the revenues against the cost, this is what's in the black and what's in the red. So we can look at the whole city and see what's net positive in black. And if you lift it up, you can see what's net negative underground. If you're like looking for a salamander under a rock or something like that, but you can see the spread of subsidy across the whole model. This is something we've all become accustomed to. We just think that this is the way things are and not understand the real cost of that. So let's just be honest with each other and just make sure we can afford it. So we did that for them. We just broke the building types down. And I know that Dan and Victor both talked about this stuff. We just basically made a menu of the different building typologies. So across the top, we call this the Brady Bunch slide. Across the top, you have residential, low, medium, and high, commercial, or a mixed use, low, medium, and high in the middle, and commercial, low, medium, and high. And these are the sticker prices. So the single family home in Eugene is subsidized to the tune of $1,400 per acre for that house type. That's a fact. The same is going to be true in your community. Run the numbers and be honest with yourselves and realize this isn't rocket science. I mean, this has actually been that Nixon administration published this document, The Cost of Sprawl, in 1973 in the first gas crisis to try to wise us up to all this stuff. This is stuff we know. So let's just be honest. And you know, that everybody's going to push back and go, well, Joe, I want a house. Great. I don't care. That's fine. Go for it. Do it. But not.
Joe,
Yeah.
Real quick, I think your slides are frozen because we're not seeing the slides anymore. Yeah.
Okay. Let me pop out and pop back in. I'll be right back.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're just going to take a minute or so to do that. Just bear with us. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Just a reminder to the audience, feel free to pose questions or thoughts in the chat as Joe is presenting.
Do y'all have the pie chart with the 80% now?
Yes, you're back online.
Okay. So when you think about your community, think about there's different layers of that community, different rings. You should have a core and there should be some tree rings that go out. You just don't want to have one tree ring being 80% of the tree. So you need to balance things out. And there's going to be tough choices, but just be honest with each other and just do the math and figure out if you can fund it. If you want to pay more taxes, go for it, or different fees or whatever, but you have to be able to pay for all of this stuff. So in Eugene, what they did is they focused on this, you know, doing some stuff downtown, obviously, but you see this little thing called Crescent Village that's actually doing all right. So they're like, all right, they're going to focus on 4 areas of that. You know, there's things that you can do in your community to move your community forward. And realize that this is an American phenomena, that this isn't an isolated situation. I'm going to show you an example in California of Lancaster, where they're getting serious because they're seriously concerned about themselves. So Lancaster is up and over the mountain from Los Angeles. You know where it is. Here's their community. They're 166,000 people. The crazy thing is they have 953 miles of roads, which is kind of insane. We put it on a map to show them. They have enough roads to go from Los Angeles to Portland. Now let me tell you a little dirty secret about roads. They have to be rebuilt every 50 years. So whatever roads that you have to rehab them every, 7 to 12 years, depending on where they are and what their use is. But every 50 years, you have to rebuild the whole thing. So it's like rebuilding your engine in your car. So this is their roads and when they were built. So their great grandparents didn't have a whole lot of roads in the early 1900s, and they went to sleep until World War II. And then things got crazy. And you can see in 1953, they built a whole lot of lane miles of roads. Well, guess what? That comes back to haunt their parents' generation in 1983. And like most communities, particularly in California, when you're hit with this huge bill, you have to find money somewhere because you're restricted with Prop 13. So in their case, they let out more development. They annexed more land. That gave them more roads. So this comes back with the second rebuild, and it brings along with it the new stuff. So we stopped them in 2016 and just said, what are you carrying? You're not going to build another road from here to infinity. You all don't really have much of an option because you're hemmed in. You can't just annex land the way that they did. But here's their build rebuild schedule of what their road carrying cost looks like. Now notice the trend. In 19 and you know, the first wave was just kind of silly. I just went ahead and did it because, you know, let's be honest, that was our bias back then. We're going to change America. We're going to reinvent the world. We're going to be totally different. No one penciled that out. And we just went ahead and did it again because now we told ourselves, this is who we are, Joe. We all drive. We love cars.
Joe,
Okay.
Joe, sorry again. I think your slide is frozen again because we're just seeing the one from Portland to LA
Oh,
stretch.
okay. I don't know what the problem is. Well, I'm at 45 minutes. Or
You
I'm
want
at
to try
40
it one
minutes.
more time, and maybe we'll try it one more time, and then
Yeah, let me
still got
pop
some
out and
time.
pop. Let me pop back out and pop back in.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry about this.
No worries. If anyone has questions that come up already in your mind, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and we can go ahead and read them out once Joe is done with his presentation.
Y'all are giving me all my tests today. So do you see the waves now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what their capital expenses look like. Now you all have very restrictive capital flows, particularly for your infrastructure, the way that the state's set up the system. So they're looking at basically flush their money into the roads. They can afford about 50% of their roads. That's the situation that they're in. And this is all over the place. You know, there's been this attitude of just somebody will figure it out in the future. Your patterns matter. I'm going to show you jump ahead and show you a quick example of that in South Bend, Indiana, where we just compared 88 houses done in a traditional pattern versus 88 houses on a cul-de-sac of cul-de-sacs. So we measured the houses, the roads, the water, the pipes, and the sewers. And basically about every year they should be spending about 122,000. If we actually charged homeowners what they're actually expending or costing, there'd be a revolt. But we should at least show people that. Now they're only paying about 21,000 in. So let's just be honest. You're being subsidized, in this case, about $100,000 for these houses. So we went and looked at these other houses and did the exact same thing and ran their pipes, water, and all of that. Their annual cost is about 79,000. They're only putting in 21,000. So they're subsidized too, but it's a whole lot less subsidy. So just by how the pattern of your development is, there's a difference. So you'll notice that their revenue is the 10% property taxes is pretty much the same. Their expenses is where things are different. So the deficit is, you know, it's about even on the revenue. It's a deficit of almost 2 times. So when you think about your community, you think about the patterns that you already have, you're operating at a deficit. You're operating in a situation that's already been given to you. So just be aware of that. This isn't a free market situation. This is a situation where you have all of these revenues already baked into the system that are essentially subsidized. These are incentives that are put into the system for the development that just basically drives you broke. And I'll show you an example of incentives. We did Indianapolis, Indiana, and this is all of their buildings. This is all of their parking for the entire county. So they're about 37% surface parking for the county, the entire county. And this is, I'll just make it into this is like a square version of a pie chart. This is their land use. And then this is where they get their money. So notice how parking and roads are about the same size, but look at the difference in what you charge parking in taxes versus the cost of the roads. Now we know who's using parking, that would be called cars. We know who's using the roads, that would be called cars. So why aren't they paying the same thing? The stuff that we like, the berms, buffers, backyards, parks, all of that stuff, that doesn't really give you anything. So the buildings are where you're getting your money. So these are their numbers. That's Marion from Marion County. She has about 1,200 square feet of buildings dedicated to her, about 800 square feet of parking, and about 1,000 square feet of roads. When this stuff gets built, the assessor puts a price tag on stuff. So the building's about $52, parking's like 75 cents a square foot, and the road's $22 a square foot in front of the building, but also in front of the parking. So right there is the subsidy. When your cost is the same in front of parking and in front of buildings, yet your costs are, your revenue is totally different. So at 2% of taxes, you're getting 71 times more taxes out of that building versus the parking, even though your cost is the same. That's the subsidy to parking. Or I'll show you another way. We just put the money into a bucket and said, how long will it take for the building to pay off its roads versus the parking? And this is what it is. So it takes 42 years for the building. So it comes close to the 50 years, which is good. But the parking takes 3,000 years. So it's never going to pay for that road. So as you demand parking, as you ask for parking, as you have parking standards, you're essentially forcing a subsidy into development. And that's a problem. They also have a problem with their roads. They have enough roads to go all the way to Anchorage, Alaska, which is not good. So every 50 years, they have to build a road to Anchorage, Alaska. This is spatial analysis, people. I know that this joke only works for the people over the age of 35, but I like to use it anyway. And let me just close with equity. There's all sorts of weird math baked into things that make things inequitous in communities. And perhaps you've heard the term redlining and you say, well, Joe, we stopped doing that. It's like, well, there's other ways that we do practice inequity. And I'll show you an example from one of my favorite places in South Florida. This is Palm Beach County. So Palm Beach County, I used to work there. They like to talk about all their rich people that once a year they do this thing with like, here are all these mansions. These are their actual tax bills, $1 million in taxes, $1.5 million, which is quite impressive. But this mansion is 58,000 square feet. So it has a separate red and white wine tasting room. By the way, I don't know what you do with a champagne. I guess you go out on the lanai or something. This is a mansion that has two mansions because you don't need to be in the same mansion with your spouse. You need to move them across the street over here. This mansion has a golf course on the ocean because we all need that. But you know me, I'm an apples to apples guy. So these are all different sizes. Let's do them on a per acre basis. So here are the numbers. So actually the smallest one is the most potent if we rearrange them. The golf course mansion's the least potent, the double mansion's in the middle of the pack. So let's go from them, all of these, you know, 1%ers to the rest of us, the multi-dollar mansions, schlubs like us. And these are like middle income on the upper left down to, these are some neighborhoods in the Jim Crow segregated areas, or what used to be Jim Crow, Pleasant City and Northwest neighborhood. And this is a shotgun shack. Her house is about $1,000 in taxes. But to be fair, you know, her house is the size of a parking space. So let's go ahead and do the per acre on this. And she's actually not doing so bad. Now you don't remember any of the wealthy people. So let me just go ahead and bring those back for a second. Let's take this guy in the middle here at 77,000. He's actually more productive than the golf course one. That's the truth of the information. You know, so he's also on the oldest block in Palm Beach County. He doesn't even have a yard. He doesn't have a golf course. He does, you know, his jacuzzi's in his parking spot. He also doesn't even have a road. The street has a sidewalk going through the middle of it called Mingo Promenade. There's like no street there. Let's talk about townhouses. These things are pulling 5,000, 8,000, but per acre, they're crushing it at $278,000 to $400,000 an acre of taxes, which is more productive than the double mansion. That's the truth. This is data. This is what works. In many communities, these townhouses are illegal. Why would you do that? I used to stop the presentation there, but you know, I couldn't resist. We rest in peace, Rush Limbaugh. He passed away yesterday, but here's his mansion at $210,000 of taxes. His market value is 56 million. He gets a taxable reduction down to 28,000. None of us pay full market value in taxes. So everybody gets a reduction. So he gets a 50% reduction by law. That's the standards. That's the way it works out. So I was like, all right, let's check her out in her shotgun shack. This is her reduction. She gets less than 1% reduction. Meanwhile, Rush's mansion's going down 50%. How on God's green earth is this fair? You know, how is this equitous? And what's crazy is, and again, this is just perfectly legal. These are just tax policies, Joe. You know, come on now. This is all the way things work. What's crazy is she's actually more tax productive than Mar-a-Lago at $33,000 versus his $28,000. That's the truth in the data. So just let's put this out there. Let's just be agnostic about what's going on. If we're not measuring this stuff, we can't manage it. So now what? Joe, you're depressing me. This is a lot of information. How do you get out of this? Well, one, know your costs. Do your maps on your costs. Understand where the revenues are going. Know that patterns affect things. Be careful of what you ask for. There are consequences. Make sure that you're honest with each other about what that is, and just make sure you can afford it. Measure what you own. You should all be conversant in how many miles of pipes and how many miles of roads you have, and realize that you can't afford them. So just be aware of that. There's going to be some harbinger as time goes on. You have to fix these roads. Understand that parking is subsidized. I've recommended to every community, get rid of your parking requirements. You don't need them. Allow things to happen. Thicken up a little bit. And speaking of thicken up your parcels, but also thin down your network. Over in Rancho Cucamonga, we ran their roads. They have enough roads to go all the way to Tucson. And y'all have probably driven through Rancho Cucamonga. These roads are crazy. They're super wide. I love that you have to, it looks like you can land an airplane on them. They paint the speed limit on them because people go so fast. And my analyst was taking pictures. There was a tractor trailer that just went ahead and just drove the wrong way because there's enough asphalt that you could do something like that. When you're in this situation, paring down the roads is super, super prudent because they're really expensive. And if you just have them wide, no one's going to want to walk next to them. So seek opportunities to grow up. Y'all are already doing that. Think about your downtown. Think about it growing. Little things can be big impact. Again, I showed you that with the little buildings. And also I'll close with having a model of future growth. When I started the presentation last time I was down there, I showed you my DNA. This is how I started my life. And this is my direction. I'm going to be my grandfather, whether I like it or not, or more importantly, I'm going to be my dad. There are things I can't change in that. So just think of that. Think of a model that you're going to be into the future, and understand good and bad. It's my family has a history of heart disease. So I have that conscious with me every time I eat. I'm making choices about salad and vegetables, and I'll eat steak or pizza, but I'm going to balance it out a little bit. And also see the data like the way the accountant sees the data. We just put it on a map, and your accountant's not going to make judgment. Your accountant just wants to see the information and allow you to make choices. So if you can afford a boat, go for it. I'm not going to criticize that. But if you can't afford a boat, you shouldn't go buying one. So be conscious of the costs and what you can account for in your data. But you need to do your math. And I apologize for the technical issues, but I guess we can open up to questions now.
Yes, thank you, Joe. A great presentation. A lot of information there, but very, very informative and easy to follow. Just great presentation. We do have I do want to open it up for questions. We do have a couple that have been posted to our Q&A session. So I'll go ahead and read them, and then we can go through each one of them. First one is from Chloe Yen, and she asks, if urban reconstruction, is it a huge investment, and if it is the cost efficiency of why some cities have buildings outdated? I don't know if that makes sense, but I'll read it again. If urban reconstruction, is it a huge investment? And if it is the cost efficiency why some cities have buildings outdated? So I don't know if Chloe, you're on the line. Maybe you can chime in.
Sounds like she's wondering about if the cost of redevelopment and fixing up these old buildings is cost prohibitive. Is that why cities have not done so?
It depends. I think some of it is your Prop 13 that with commercial properties that we've seen. It depends on the city. If you go to if you go over to where there's older buildings, like let's say in Redlands or in Riverside, you might find that there's why should I buy the building and get the upcharge in the transaction? Lots of times building owners in commercial environments will put it in LLC. They'll transact the LLC, and I'll buy the LLC from somebody, but it didn't change owners because it's the same LLC. We'll see that a lot, which suppresses the value. There's lots of quirks in it. As far as you do need old buildings because they can become cheap space. I would recommend the book Death and Life in the American City by Jane Jacobs. She has a great couple of chapters about the need for cheap space and the need for some old buildings to be laying around. Sometimes it's all right to even have some junky buildings. But the context of how they use the land is what's critical and important. And also, like, you should have some space above it. You should put maybe apartments or other offices above single-use buildings. So that's an opportunity, but it's going to depend. I'd need to know more of the location she was talking about.
Okay, great. We do have another question here from an anonymous attendee, and she's just asking a basic tax question. How can I find the taxable value per acre? And I think she's asking about roads and just infrastructure in general.
But roads and infrastructure have no value. So you're not going to find that in any tax record. Private property, you will. And you can go to your county's assessor site. And actually, I'm challenging my assessment right now. Our assessment came due. I have my handy dandy little paperwork right here. And they just increased my home by 27%, which is kind of insane. While my neighbors only went up 20%. So that's an easy challenge. But I would recommend any homeowner and property owner to be anybody, any renter, because you're going to be passed off that tax bill by the property owner. Understand and go to your county's website. You can click on properties. There's a map and you can just poke around and it will have the property card. In it will have the acreage and the value. And that's all you need to do is divide the taxable value by the acres. So you get value per acre to understand its productivity, and you can compare properties against each other that way, just by poking around. And what we're doing is we're basically doing that with a big computer model and then visualizing it. But that's basically all we're doing is just dividing those two numbers together. And that tells you what it pays. As far as the road, that's something you could talk to your engineering department about or your city staff. They'll have that number on a depreciation schedule. They'll know when the roads are falling apart and all of that. But that's usually hidden in the asset ledger.
Right, right.
Generally, a road's about, think of it as like $1 million a lane mile for its useful life. So if you have a two lane road, that's 2 million per mile. So when you start asking for more lanes because you're like, oh, I don't want traffic, you're actually asking for more money in the ground. And you better have some tall buildings to pay for that, because the wider the street, the more expensive it gets. And it never solves. I mean, you all know this. It doesn't solve for congestion by adding a lane to something to just get more people. It's like fighting obesity by buying bigger clothes.
Right. That is, I've used that reference before.
Yeah.
Buy bigger pants to lose weight.
It's fun for a year.
Yeah. So quick follow-up on that question. So do you see a difference in like rural communities or urban communities as far as how much a road is costing the city or a jurisdiction? Or is it pretty much the same across the board?
It's the same. It's going to matter. It's going to change based on, like, obviously if you go up into Minnesota, they have to put down a deeper base because of the freeze thaw cycle. Where y'all are, it's not as bad as Lancaster. Lancaster is more of a desert climate. You have as much sun as they do, but it's a little bit more intense over there, even though it's not that much further away. But that's going to affect the life. There's little things, but it's marginal differences. Some places, particularly here in North Carolina, we have a particular monopoly from just like one company that owns all the asphalt in this state, and they have every community sort of over a barrel on it. It's just not good. But price of asphalt is going up at 5 to 7% per year. And now we've seen it going up as high as 11%. So if you have constrictions on your property taxes and there's no constriction on the cost environment, it's a recipe for disaster. And what we find is that most communities will do that. They'll cap their taxes, they'll restrict their revenues, and you're essentially, it's a death sentence for a city to do that. And I don't fault the taxpayer, because again, don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fellow behind the tree. We're all tax evaders. We're all trying to find ways to get out of it. But I think it's a service to understand why it's necessary to have government. Yeah,
absolutely. Great point. We do have another question here from Grace Hayashi. She asked, what was the before and after of Eugene after you redesigned it? So I think you had an example from Eugene.
Yeah, we didn't redesign anything. We basically just showed them their cash sheet. Now, what was interesting was they did some non-sexy things. They changed their fee schedule in their pipes because they people that were 10 miles out at the end of the system were being charged the exact same as people that were just right next to the pump, if you will. So they looked at the fact that that's not equitous, that that person out there has more infrastructure. So they, you know, they changed the way that they looked at that. That's kind of like a simple way of explaining it. They also they're working on a way, you know, they're getting rid of a highway in the middle of their city that wasn't part of our project, but our project supported that type of thinking and analysis. They're doing some pretty bold things. They're also rethinking their parking standards. They were going to annex more land. Basically, they have a growth boundary, and they were considering widening it. And once we ran the analysis for them, they're just like, no, that's off the table, because they saw all the inefficiencies that they currently had, and that wasn't going to solve the problem. It was just going to delay it. So that was a pretty big change that we're proud of.
Okay, great, thank you. I do want to open it up for additional questions from anyone who is on the webinar who wants to chime in. If you want to raise your hand, just let us know, or just use the raise hand feature. We can go ahead and let you speak if you have any questions or comments that you want to make. And I'm not seeing any at the moment. So I do have some questions I wanted to ask you. Maybe we can get a little bit more into the information you provided. So, you know, not every place, and you mentioned this, not every place is going to want to become Manhattan or San Francisco, right? So how do you find the right amount of density that fits for a suburban community that maximizes that dollar per acre and, you know, fits with the vision of what the community wants to see?
One of the things that we see as a rule of thumb from a footprint of area that, like, let's say the downtown takes inside the city versus so if I can carve it in, and I know that area, I can also figure out its value compared to the whole portfolio. And like in the case of our downtown, it's a footprint of for every square acre or mile of downtown, it's producing 6 times its weight in the financial performance. So it's a 1-to-6 ratio of productivity. When we did the project up in Rancho Cucamonga, they had the Victoria Gardens area, and that's pulling a 1 to less than 1 value productivity. So that tells me that they just never really grew up a downtown, and they didn't. They just basically suburbanized with big boxes and all that stuff. So their downtown is currently worth, and this is just off the top of my head, I want to say it was like 390 million. Their downtown really should be somewhere close to 4 billion. That's a tremendous difference in what they could have versus, and it's just for 40 years, we just assumed that we could just do a different kind of development pattern and it would just hope that it would work out, but it didn't, you know, and that's kind of the situation that they're in. So that's a huge disparity in what they have and what they could have had. Or just what I showed you in Hennepin County, that y'all have, and just that little chicken leg of Riverside that I showed you, you have more population than Minneapolis. That's stunning. You know, somebody should have made a downtown that big. And Riverside had one for a while, but then they gutted it. That didn't work out. So
yeah, they put that pedestrian mall in, and I think that killed the main street that was going through that town, and slowly trying to rebuild that. But now you're starting to see some changes.
But then they put all this competition around it, you
Right.
know, that didn't have to pay as high taxes. No one was paying for that infrastructure out there. We just went ahead and just built it.
Right.
And so you basically gave a subsidy to all that development to kill your own downtown.
Right.
That wasn't that, you know, but again, it's not their fault. They didn't, I mean, it kind of is, but they just weren't asking those questions back then because we had a bias. We're going to modernize. You also had redlining, where you were allowing mortgages to go to certain areas that was essentially creating white flight.
Right.
So we abandoned our downtowns and cities.
Great. Okay, I want to open it up again and see if anyone has any questions or comments. And again, using the raise hand feature, I don't see any in the Q&A box, but if anybody has any questions, go ahead and use the raise hand feature, and we can let you speak. And I have just a quick follow-up question too on that. Why is it that you see the disparities between, like, the West Coast? You're making the comparison of Riverside County and our chicken leg compared to some of the Midwest and South and the East Coast. Why is it that the West seems to be lower in bringing in the revenues per acre. Why, what is the disparity?
I wouldn't say you're lower. It's just you just have more suburban environment, and culturally, y'all accepted Los Angeles as the prime. It's like Los Angeles is everybody's main downtown,
Right.
and then but it's like, you know, the land area size of like Maine or something like that for one city, which is kind of insane. But culturally, that's the way that you behave because you built all these highways to function as your local boulevards until everybody started using them. And so a lot of places actually had a head start. Redlands has a little, if you look at our model of San Bernardino County, Redlands pops up bigger than Rancho Cucamonga. But then it flattens out real quickly. But Redlands actually still has their downtown. San Bernardino completely cratered their downtown. That was foolish. But again, we had these patterns of not really asking why cities were falling apart. When you just start doing these crazy gambles of pedestrian malls, building a mall downtown. I think didn't San Bernardino do that? A lot of California cities did that.
Yeah.
But California culture bought more into the automobile world. But really what you were doing is you were doing well because you were importing a lot of people. And so it's, you know, when you shift a taxpayer from St. Louis to Los Angeles, that person's bringing income and becoming a new taxpayer. And that somehow, you know, that could hide a lot of the financial calamity that was coming down the road. And this is the same with Lancaster, the growth that they got just because of Edwards Air Force Base. And
Right.
then, you know, once the Air Force Base kind of calmed down, they had way too much. They're carrying way too big a suit at this point.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. Makes sense. Makes sense. We do have a raised hand by Keith White, so I'm gonna go ahead and allow him to talk here. Or Mark, if I don't, you know what, Mark, I don't think I have the rights to do that. So if you can let Keith speak, that'd be great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Keith.
Hey, with Eastville, how can Eastville be with the size of Eastville? How would they be able to make it downtown, a good downtown here, and have like arts and crafts and have other things like basically to build an economy? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, you want that like liveliness and vitality. You know, there's some things you can do right away. You know, if you have those huge parking lots outside of the town hall, and that you could use for like a art trucks or food trucks could come in, talk to the property owners about stuff like that. You know, you could have some activity and just don't be fussy about it. Just do it kind of as an easy investment. There's you know, obviously we have to wait till COVID ends before you could do that. But you know, that's become culturally acceptable to have open air markets and little bazaars. That's really low investment from an entrepreneur standpoint. So that's all it takes is whatever they can load in their pickup truck and show up. You know, it's make it easy for people and try it, see what works. There's a whole field called tactical urbanism where they specialize in that. These kind of like low investment in tests on the urban environment. You could start that and build a culture of those businesses and see if you can start building entrepreneurs. Those people may become successful, buy a bigger truck, or they might end up moving into a storefront if they have enough capital. Now you can do that until you wait for the buildings to show up. You know, you could talk to the property owners and see if they want to rehab or redevelop parts. And I know that your city manager is already having these discussions with the large property owners. How do you evolve them to the next level? Now, something like the Leal site is just a really big dairy right now, and that could be a big change all at once. You know, there are pluses and minuses to those. There are a lot more risk because you're doing a lot at once, but it's also a bigger opportunity. And ask for those things, you know, to have small spaces and to have a blended environment, but also be aware of what's the trade-off and the cost and the risk. You know, as a property owner, I know that if I have like a Subway, it's a, you know, it's coming as a national chain. It's going to be a lot more predictable to deal with than an independent entrepreneur that may or may not be in business in 5 years. We don't know. So I think that's where the hard part for the property owners is they are taking on a risk with those entrepreneurs. And we did that with our stores, but we also worked with them and understood their deficiencies. A lot of entrepreneurs aren't good business people to begin with. Some of them have really good business senses, but they don't necessarily have experience. So we would go out of our way to work with them with our CPAs, our accountants would work with them to keep them in business. And it was a lot of work. It wasn't easy, but we also are proud of our successes with our fellow entrepreneurs. So that's something maybe you could do either through you can get creative with tax increment or other kind of business incentives to build that culture. But maybe if you start with the art kiosks or the food trucks and stuff like that, and start getting people together, you'll start to see who's creative and who's got the raw talent to be invested in. But you have to kind of allow folks the opportunity to fill the environment, just get out of their way, and just don't be worried about making a couple mistakes.
Yeah, great points, Dan. Thank you, Joe. So I don't see any other questions. I did want to bring up another question on my end. So besides being smarter with how we use our land, so we're actually going through a general plan update right now. So what are some other ways that we could take advantage of the general plan update to be more efficient with our city resources and services that we provide to our residents? So what kind of things, and you talked a little bit about that, those incentives of trying to bring in small businesses and incubator kind of spaces and that kind of stuff. But what other, given that we have this opportunity right now to really set the tone for development over the next 20 years?
Well, I think, you all are doing a great job with, just take a step back and realize what you're doing at an educational level. I've seen your community several times now in many of these public presentations. You all are very literate about a civic conversation, more so than a lot of places. So you have that advantage. You're starting with raw talent in your community of folks that want to be engaged. You're documenting these presentations. This is really important, and a lot of communities don't get into the details of this stuff. This is pretty nerdy stuff, let's be honest. but it's critically important because this is your civic foundation, and you're having a conversation that's dispassionate. It's just, let's just talk about this, and you're getting those ideas forward. There's a lot that you can't predict in a plan. It's like we can all just look in our lives, and I'm saying this as someone who's trained as a planner. We just look back in our own lives and just think about the crazy successes that you've had, or those moments that you're proud of. How many of those were actually planned? Right. They were just weird things that happened, that all of a sudden, like, you land in this job or I land in my job. It's like, I didn't plan this. I didn't lay awake when I was 9 years old thinking someday I'm going to be a tax expert. It just kind of happened. To me, this is all city design. I still feel that I'm doing city design. So I would see the same with your city, is that aim in the right direction. Don't be afraid of risks, and just kind of try things out. And then also just constantly check your biases at the curb. If I come into a meeting, thinking I'm going to be asking for X or Y, I have to be open to A or B. It's like, right. Let's kind of have a dialogue about that and just have a civic discussion. And I think that you all have the talent in language to already have those skills. And you have these now you have this video, you could use it right. in perpetuity. Yeah.
No, yeah, the great points, Joe. Thank you. I want to be mindful of our time. We got about 7 minutes left, but I do want to give another opportunity to anybody on the webinar who wants to pose a question before we call it a night. Anyone, just raise your hand. In the meantime, I can go ahead and ask my final question here, unless somebody else has a question. So given that Eastville is about over 90% built out with mostly 3,000 to 4,000 square foot homes, and it happened over a span of 20 years, right? So really quickly, lots are about 7,000 square feet, in a lot of neighborhoods with cul-de-sacs, right? And so you talked about the subsidy that the city has to go through to provide all that services and infrastructure. So what are some of the things that we could do to create more fiscally efficient, be more fiscally efficient with the city's existing infrastructure? So with the existing infrastructure, what kind of things can we be looking at to get more value out of that?
Well, part of it is when we all go travel to cities, can start at the big ones like Paris or Rome or London. when you go to those big cities, you're going to a city that's had thousands of years of tearing itself down and building itself back up, and in all these different iterations. And that's the life of cities. You have to allow them to iterate and change, because they're organic, and the times change, cultures change, all of that stuff. Um, but if you calcify the city, it becomes difficult at an economic level. And I think as a homeowner, the change is difficult. I bought into a neighborhood for X, Y, or Z, right? And we've gotten accustomed to a pattern, particularly because of zoning, that the cities post 1920 really changed dramatically from cities pre 1920. And the irony is we all like the stuff that's pre 1920. We all visit it. We take pictures of it when we go see it. It's all cute and all of this stuff. And that was a totally different kind of way of building cities, and it worked. And so we did some massive experiments. Some of it's good. Some of we don't live next to slaughtering plants anymore. We've been able to not do that. But I think that's going to be the challenge for your community, is that you did all grow up within a really short window. So that means it's all going to depreciate around the same time. So your portfolio is going to all ride at the same wave. You're not going to have the diversity that a lot of other cities have just by who you are. So that's going to be a challenge. And also, as you mentioned, the infrastructure and the patterns. A lot of it's going to be controversial if you have to connect the network better to solve some traffic problems. That means you might have to buy some houses and open up a cul-de-sac. That's going to be extremely controversial to people, but it's going to be an important community conversation to figure out how to weigh the community consequences of all of that stuff. And that's going to be challenging. Put it another way is that you've effectively moved all your furniture in the house, and now you have to start thinking about the carpet. Your furniture is in place. You only have a little bit of house left where you can really think the carpet without having a big problem. That's going to be the Lille site, but maybe the Target, but for the most part, it's going to be, you're going to have two different conversations going on. There's going to be the easier sides, and then there's going to be the complicated stuff. And that's going to be the challenge, but you're not alone in this. There's a lot of communities having these same conversations, and there's a lot of experimenting going on.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. Especially the point about, cities we tend to think of cities as static, and this is what it is. And, it's only been a span of even 100 years is not a long time for a city when you compare it to, Rome and the cities in Europe that have been around for thousands of years, right? And how much they've gone over and redid themselves. And I think the key point, what you mentioned, is education, right? Stepping back and having people look at the big picture. So great points. Okay, Joe. So I know that
This is an interesting book here, Triumph of the City.
Yeah.
Talks about, this guy's a bit of a fire hose of information, but it really gets you thinking differently about the way cities operate.
Thank you for that recommendation. A nice plug there for that book. So we'll go ahead and I think that's going to be it for questions. I don't see any other folks. One last call for anybody wanting to ask a question. If not, Joe, do you have any closing statements or anything you want to leave us with, words of wisdom?
Have fun. I would try the seriously, I think the idea of the art festival in one of the parking lots, or to try to get active on once we can get back together again. And there's also, particularly in your area, I'll bet there's enough art institutions in nearby communities that would love to travel to your community and set one up. So don't necessarily, definitely encourage your own local homegrown artists to be involved, but you can probably reach out to Riverside, and they're looking for, these are all merchants. If you think about it, an artist is a business person. They need to sell art. So they're just looking
will buy it.
They're looking for markets, or it just crafts, everything, it's just, we have an event here in downtown Asheville called the Big Crafty. And it's all of these people that just make stuff in their garage and stuff like that. They show up 3 times a year. And as far as I'm concerned, they're small businesses,
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Joe. This has been really informative and just a great presentation. We really appreciate your time. I'm going to just go ahead and close now and just mention to everyone that we do have a survey that's going to go out to everyone within the next couple of days, a follow-up to this presentation. And if you can just go on there and fill it out, that would be great. So again, Joe, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time. And this has been, again, very informative. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care. And
Yeah. All right. You
hopefully
too. Everyone have a
hopefully
good
I'll
evening.
see you when this whole pandemic thing ends. So
Yeah.
take care.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
Bye.
Bye.